You want me to put that on my Tudor?
The many cracks in her facade. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Harry's wife, as a mid-range narcissist, operates a facade. The purpose of this facade enables her to fit in more readily with those around her, so that her narcissism doesn't cause her to stand out in a way that would represent further threats to control. It allows her to interact with people more readily so that they provide her with fuel. It enables her to pass under the radar to acquire character traits and residual benefits with greater ease. Many narcissists operate a facade. With unaware narcissists, it's done instinctively, subconsciously, governed by their narcissism. They do not have to remind themselves, I need to portray an air of being a kind and considerate person. Their narcissism does so for them. But as I've explained in separate works, there is an eternal battle between the ignited fury that often looks to make its presence felt and the facade management which tries to keep it under control. Greater narcissists also operate with a facade, but they have a very high threshold on their ignited fury, and therefore their facades invariably remain intact, and it's very unusual to see a breach of those facades. With mid-range narcissists, some people won't spot it because they don't know what they're looking for. Other people may see something, but they don't realise that it's a breach in a narcissist's facade. But with Harry's wife, it's a combination of the fact that so many people scrutinise her and because her facade management doesn't always prove that effective. It's almost as if it gets a little worn out by the repeated threats that arise because of the transmission of her ignited fury. Because she's become so prominent and she's appeared in so many instances that have been filmed, this provides us with an excellent opportunity to see those instances where the facade cracks. It doesn't crumble, because if she did, you would have a full sort of meltdown scenario with her ignited fury pouring forth. Instead, what you get are glimpses of the ignited fury, sometimes cold, sometimes heated, as the facade is straining to contain it, and, in some instances, it gets through. In the first instance, I'm going to show you some footage which shows two aspects of the way that the facade strains under the pressure of her ignited fury so that you see cracks in the facade. Here comes the footage. The first crack in her facade is the manifestation of the death stare. I've analysed this in detail previously, so I don't need to go into as great detail this time because we're also going to have numerous examples of this. But Catherine, then Duchess of Cambridge, is the nemesis. She represents so many things that Harry's wife is envious of. And the consequence of this is that when she sees Catherine on her radar, her narcissism immediately demonstrates her true feelings towards her, which are, of course, venomous and hate-filled. She cannot help herself but send that death stare in her direction. Catherine doesn't see it, but the camera picked it up. and it provides you with an opportunity to see how the facade that she is presenting to the people that she's meeting with, etc., immediately dissipates, not for long, but for a number of seconds, so that it shows the painted black nature of Catherine's status to Harry's wife as she gives her the death stare. Her envy, her hatred, her antipathy all come pouring through. In the second instance of the crack in the facade, Harry's wife is undertaking some interviewing duties with, I presume, somebody from Suits. The other individual you'll see is the one who's doing the talking, and therefore, whilst Harry's wife is in the room, attention is on that individual and not her. Even in such a circumstance, she cannot stand that the attention is elsewhere, as you will see repeatedly the clenching of the jaw as the ignited fury attempts to make its presence felt. But instead, of course, the facade holds good. There's no death stare, there's no nasty comment that's been made, and to the uninitiated, they wouldn't think there was anything wrong. But for those of you in the know as the consequence of my work, you can see the jaw clenching that's going on, which is the battle that is taking place between the facade, which largely holds out here, and her ignited fury. There's only the very slightest of crack, which shows the clenching of the jaw taking place. We're now going to move on to some more examples of showing the cracks in her facade. Here comes the footage. The first example is interesting. It's a crack in her facade, but not so much related to ignited fury, but rather to the fact that her narcissism isn't certain what it should be showing next. She's at an event, and of course there are people around her, thus facade management engages that aspect, if you like, on the panel in front of her. The light is flashing for facade management. She looks at Harry, comes back and nods as if she's offering understanding, and then in the next instant, it's as if a reset button has been set. Her eyes flutter, and she looks ahead. It's an unnatural response, and it's because she is not actually engaging with the individual in an invested and attached way, but rather her narcissism is always trying to work out what response should she be showing here. And there's a brief pause as the narcissism seeks out the appropriate face to show to the outside world. The cherry picker, of which I speak so often, has gone racing away into the warehouse and is a little bit slow in coming back with the appropriate facial expression. So it's a crack in her facade, but this time not as a consequence of ignited fury, but the delay in the internal cherry picker locating the appropriate package to present to the outside world. In the next instance, we see repeatedly how she flicks from listening to somebody and then providing them with a glare, because evidently there is a threat to control, and thus her ignited fury is trying to make its presence felt. In the next instance, it's Harry who once again is the subject of it. Harry's the one who's talking, which means that she in effect feels ignored. Now, it's preposterous from your point of view for that to be said to be the case, because of course she stood right next to him, but it doesn't matter. She needs the fuel, not Harry, And the fact that he's the one that's talking and all the attention is going to him results in her sense of control being threatened. And the facade ordinarily would try and keep that in control. But instead, what it ends up doing is it portrays her as being problematic, because what you then see is the way that she looks at him, almost with a grimace, because there is the ignited fury rising, basically saying, I should be the one talking, not you. You're hogging the limelight. The facade management survives to the extent she doesn't grab him by the hair and knee him in the bollocks. But what it does show is another fracture in it, as you can see by her facial expression. The distaste for him, the hatred, because he's perceived to be hogging the limelight, comes to the fore. There's next an infamous still of the two after their last formal engagement as working royals. The snapshot of the picture here again shows a fracturing in the facade as a consequence of the rather strange look that's on her face. Harry looks fairly wistful, perhaps ruminating on that being the final engagement. But for her, something has clearly irked her, which has resulted in this anguished expression that's being exhibited. Again, the facade struggling to take it, to rather keep it in place. There's another instance of where Harry's talking and you can see that she's staring at him in a most unnatural fashion. It really stands out as being demonstrative of how odd she can behave because the facade isn't doing its job properly. He is there talking, and of course, because he's not directing his fuel towards her, she ends up staring at him, almost right on top of him. And when you look at the footage, you can see how unnatural that is and how her facade has failed her in that regard. The next instance you'll have seen, of course, relates to the Grenfell cookbook experience, where her mother has the audacity to interrupt her while she's speaking, something that I've covered in detail before, but once again, because somebody has interrupted her, there's a threat to control, and immediately you see the speed of the ignited fury before the facade can do anything about it. She gives her mother the death stare. Thereafter, there is another instance of the facade failing to keep her hatred and antipathy under wraps in relation to, once again, Catherine, the nemesis. As she looks across, the facade fails to act in time to keep hidden the antipathy and hatred that she has for the then Duchess of Cambridge. And then finally, there's an instance where Harry's engaging in discussion with what looks like a schoolgirl, and Harry's wife, rather than joining in with the conversation, is looking around almost as if she's just woken up, as if she's, why am I here? What's going on? And this is because, again, her narcissism is trying to determine what is the appropriate response in these circumstances, and it's not able to do so, because she's not the centre of attention. It's floundering around, as we have seen, with regard to her appearance on stage at Kevin Costner's fundraiser, and you get this rather bewildered look. Again, the facade hasn't done its job. The problem that Harry's wife's facade has is that it's under strain repeatedly because of, one, the repeated threats to control, two, the gaps in that warehouse that exist, and thirdly, the fact that she's under such scrutiny because she's so often filmed. This has been a most instructive look into the many cracks in her facade, both in relation to ignited fury and instances where the correct response has not been located. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.